Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Elliot Cronenfeld, and I am a certified sex therapist with specialties in fertility, infidelity recovery, and intimacy skills. Um, so, we're going to talk a lot today about sex and intimacy during the family building process. So, here is what I would like to, first of all, be really clear about. Um, who is this talk for? There is something in this talk for everyone. And what I mean by that, if you are a cisgendered heterosexual couple, there are things in here for you. If you don't identify as heterosexual, if you don't identify as cisgender, there are still some things in here that you're going to be able to take. Not everything is for everyone because everybody is on a different journey. And we don't look at fertility treatment in a monolithic way because no two journeys are alike. And I do a lot of work with cisgendered straight couples. I also do a lot of work with gay, trans, lesbian couples as they're looking to build their families. And one of the things that I have learned through this career that I have developed is that when you meet a couple going through infertility, you've met one couple going through infertility. And so I want to challenge everyone as we go through this to think about how might this apply to you, and if this is not part of your journey, to at least still engage, to learn, and to listen to what might be going on for other couples so that you can at least have a sense of how your journey might be unique. Because different paths bring different challenges. People end up in a fertility journey for multitudes of reasons. We have differing bodies, we have different cultures, we have different resources, we have different coping strategies. So there are different challenges with every journey. And with that, different paths also bring different opportunities. And so what I would ask you to also to think about is where through the course of our conversation today might you find an opportunity to think differently, to perhaps make a different type of decision, or perhaps even to learn how to talk to your care providers differently, or to talk to your partner differently, or to ask yourself what you may want and need in a new and different way. And hopefully what we'll do through the course of the conversation is break down what that might look like. Because we all start with the fantasy, right? We start with the hope and dream that it's going to be easy and perhaps even romantic in some ways. That if, excuse me, if, we're cisgendered and heterosexual, that we're going to just have that moment. I decided that I'm going to have a baby and, a night of lovemaking. And then I get to have that surprise moment where I disclose the happy news. If we're not cisgendered or we're not heteronormative, we have a fantasy that we're going to make this plan and we're just going to go through a third-party reproductive process, and it's going to be easy and joyful, and we're going to build a family that I've always dreamed of. And we romanticize it, and we hope for it. And we put a lot of energy into that. And what happens is we get the reality, and we go from the romantic castle to the doctor's office and the hospital and the medical clinics. And what we start to realize is that the fantasy that we had, that it was going to be easy, it was going to be connecting, a wonderfully connecting experience with our partner, or if we're single, that connecting with our bodies or with our community for support ends up starting to fracture a little bit. And then we have to start engaging with others and other resources in ways we had never planned, and in ways that, quite frankly, we might not know how to do. And we become at the mercy of systems and agencies and social narratives that become very, very challenging for us. And what that starts to do is it starts to impact the way that sex and intimacy in our intimate relationships start to happen. So, what I thought I would do is to walk through the phases of intimacy in the journey in a way, and I don't want to talk about this in a way that is a stereotype, but I would rather talk about this in a way that is a generalization. And this is where, going back to the start of our conversation, where not everything I say is for everyone, but there's going to be something in here for everyone. And I'm going to ask you to think through, how do you relate to these phases of the journey? And what have you experienced? And that might be some of the material that you want to put in the chat or you want to ask questions about, particularly if you haven't gone the entire length of your journey yet. And so some of your questions and some of your comments may be somewhat aspirational. Tell me about what's coming. Tell me about what I need to prepare for. And some of it may be historical. And yes, that happened to us. And here's the impact of that happening to us. So what I always say is the first phase of the intimacy journey is the fantasy, right? That castle in the sky. And we want sex and intimacy to be fun, and we want it to be romantic, and maybe even a little erotic, and maybe even a little kinky, right? But we want sex to be easy. We want sex to be fulfilling and affirming. And we want the emotional intimacy that goes with that to feel like it engulfs us. And to be able to think that those wonderful parts of humanity and those wonderful parts of relationship might result in this growing family that we've decided to build, help to create that fantasy mode. But when reality happens, we've been trying, it's not happening. You know, it's month after month of no pregnancy, or no month after month of not achieving goals. Or if you know that you have to use some type of third-party assistance because you are not cisgendered or you're not heterosexual and you're in a different structure of relationship, that you're going to have to start bringing people in, that the reality of what does it mean to start to ask for help. And in here, typically what will happen for a lot of folks is we start to doubt our own bodies. We start to doubt that we understand our bodies. We start to feel like our bodies aren't doing what they were meant to do, that they're not doing what I want them to do. We begin to question, is it me? Is it you? Is it both of us? Why isn't it happening? And that sense of doubt that we didn't have during fantasy starts to create a little bit of a wedge in our ability to connect and to have intimacy. The stress starts to build, the anxiety starts to build. And what starts to happen is we start to turn inward. We start to turn inward. And we'll get to a certain point, and this could go on for months, before we finally get to the third stage, which is when we actually start seeking outside help. And we go to a doctor. And this is the very subtle but very intrusive process of medicalization. And what I mean by medicalization, it's where we start to turn our bodies and ourselves and our journey over to others. We start to give up a sense of control. Emotionally, we want to hold the control, but we start to give up the control. And our care providers start to break us down to our composite parts. We start becoming a uterus and testes and sperm and eggs and fallopian tubes and vas deferens. And we start becoming a collection of parts. And people start talking to us through our parts. And treatment starts on our parts. And oftentimes, who we are as a whole being starts to become diminished, which means that in our intimate partner relationships, it is really hard to remain intimate and to have a really vibrant sex life, because now our sex is starting to be dictated by others. When should we not have sex? When should we not masturbate? When should we try to procreate? When should we have coitus? And how often should we have coitus? And when should we, how should we have coitus? And so our sex starts to get very directed, and our sex becomes transactional. I'm going to have sex when the ovulation kit turns. I'm not going to have sex when we're leading up to the ovulation kit. I'm going to wear certain kinds of underwear. So underwear that I might find sexy or it might make me feel like in the mood becomes secondary. And this overlay of medicalization also starts to invade not just the way that we think about our body parts, but it's also about the ways that we have to engage insurance companies and asking permission for coverage for this treatment. So we're giving up control not only to doctors, but to other agencies and other systems as well. So insurance companies will tell us when we can have treatment and when we can't have treatment. Really starting to break down our sense of control over our body, how we use it, when we use it, and what that engagement is supposed to look like with our partner. Sex becomes out of our control. This process of medicalization can have a deep, deep impact on our mental health, the way we socialize, the way we deal with stress, anxiety, depression, our ability to communicate. And what we often will do is we'll start to close in and make ourselves smaller. And we realize that the story that we started to share, we realize that the more we share it, then if we bring people along on this journey, everyone starts to have an opinion, starts to tell us how to manage it. If we would just drink the tea, if we would just pray to God, if we would just do all of these things, then all of these things would work. And so the medicalization process starts to then seep out, not just from the medical community and the insurance communities, but it also starts getting into our families and into our social networks, until the point where we believe that nobody is seeing us as a whole person. Nobody sees us in our entirety. And it's really hard in a couple to see each other in our entirety when we feel so dissected. Hopefully, what happens is that we don't stay in the medicalization phase too significantly long. The medicalization phase for some people might be one round. There are people who might be in the medicalization process for years, because the medicalization process might not be about conception. It might be an issue of gestation. We can get pregnant, but we can't hold a pregnancy. We have had a series of miscarriages. The medicalization process for non-heterosexual, non-cisgendered people might be about challenging our relationships with our body. It might be a lesbian couple where they have decided that one partner would gestate the child because the other partner never saw themselves as a gestating person. And because the person that was going to gestate for some reason can't, does the responsibility then fall onto the second partner to gestate that child? And what would that do for their sense of being, their sense of identity, and their relationship to their own body and their own body dysmorphia. And, there are so many layers to this that when we get to the conversation in the chat, I hope that we can pull those apart. So for those of you who are in the audience that are thinking about how this medicalization process is sitting with you, please go ahead and put those questions and thoughts in the chat, because I think this is one of the most critical places where relationship injury can happen. I think this is where the journey becomes the most disconnected. One way or another, we move out of the medicalization phase, and maybe there's a baby. Maybe. Because here, if there is a baby, that can be tremendous joy and excitement, but there can also be fear and anxiety around that birth, and what would happen if I want to have a second baby, and how do I safeguard this baby after this journey that we've been through. If you get to the place in your journey where there is no baby, the realization that you will either be child free and have a life without a child, or you're going to try another option such as adoption or foster care, or try a different journey to bring a child into your life, becomes a position of either we have all this focus on this child and recovering from gestation, birth, and delivery, or we've moved out of the medicalization phase and we've moved into this bigger kind of emotional legal phase of trying to have a child. But both of those outcomes can still be very decentering for sex and intimacy. If you have a baby, one of the things that I say to couples all of the time is, first of all, congratulations. That's wonderful. But too often, the parents then become so focused and so centered on this baby that they have gone through hell and high water to bring into their home, that they forget to turn towards each other and say, now is the time to reinvigorate our intimacy and our relationship. That the relationship, this marriage, whether you're married or not, I'll call it a marriage, but this union of the two of you still has to be a priority. And I say to couples all of the time, your union needs to come before the baby. Because now that you have this baby, this arc of reintroducing sex and intimacy, emotional intimacy, closeness, becomes critically important. Because you want to be able to model for this child, as the child grows, what good, healthy sex and intimacy looks like in a connected relationship. Too often what will happen is that couples will do what I call, they'll hide in the minivan. Now that we have the baby, it is all about the baby, and every focus is on the child. And it always becomes the child before the union. And so the minivan becomes more important than the bedroom. And we have to kind of flip that script a little bit. I think that one of the things that happens here is being able to explore that in this post-gestation, post-labor and delivery phase, there will be a phase where sex isn't going to happen, because there's a period of recovery, there's gaining bodies back, there's a sleeplessness, there's exhaustion, there's the sense of overwhelming about just trying to figure out how to know this baby and how to take care of this baby. And that's real. Having a baby is not easy, even after the baby comes. So while sex may be on hold, it's important at least to reintroduce intimacy. And I probably should have started with this, which is, what is my definition of intimacy? Intimacy is the balance of safety and vulnerability. I want people just to think about that for a second. The balance of safety and vulnerability. So if I am so safe that I can't be vulnerable, I'm closed off. If I'm so vulnerable that I don't feel safe, I'm triggered all the time. But real intimacy is when we can balance that safety and vulnerability. I am safe enough to be vulnerable. And as we go through all of the phases of this journey, how do we allow that sense of intimacy, that sense of vulnerability with each other in a way that feels safe to be present as part of the support system moving forward? Because we won't have good sex if we don't have good intimacy. And the way that we're going to manage all of the challenge around reality, medicalization, and this maybe baby phase is by ensuring that we're balancing safety and vulnerability for both partners. Now, there's one phase left. And this phase is really the recovery phase. And what I mean by the recovery phase is we've moved out of the baby making, family growing process. And we have gotten to the point where our family is complete, whatever that looks like. No matter how many people are in there, we've decided that the family is complete. And it is that process of being able to turn back toward each other, making sure that we are prioritizing this union and really making sure that that intimacy, that balance of safety and vulnerability is present for both of us, and that being aware that what it's going to take to balance safety and vulnerability has changed dramatically from when we were in the fantasy phase. That we have learned and we have grown. And so our ability to reintroduce this sense of connectedness that isn't focused on this process, that we claim our bodies back as our own, that we heal from the medicalization and the dissecting of our parts, and we reintegrate and feel one with our bodies again. And this is going to take perhaps some therapy to heal some of the wounds that this process might bring to somebody. It might mean some couples work to talk about what the language of intimacy is going to look like after the journey that you've been on and the outcomes that you have achieved. But realizing that the journey doesn't end when a baby does or does not enter your family. You still have to do this recovery work to reclaim bodies and connection. So I want to put up my contact information so that you have a moment to capture this. Please do feel free to visit my website or my email, Couples by Intention, because I think that this whole process requires us to be really intentional. And I've done a lot of writing on the importance of intentionality as we try to maintain sex and intimacy. So Couples by Intention is my website that talks about that. But what I'd like to do now is actually have a conversation with you.